Hey, comrades. Hope everyone's doing great. I just finished Grave Peril by, I forget the guy's name, but it's a Harry Dresden novel. It's the third one. I know it's been a minute. I reviewed the first two on here somewhere far back, but I have like the paper copies of these books, and it's a lot harder for me to like read full books than just like listen to the audiobooks. But I want to read these books. I actually like reading. It's just like there's so much other stuff that's going on, and so it's hard to like squeeze that in sometimes. And then with like a audiobook, I can throw that thing on at like 2.5, 3 times speed at times, and so then it makes it a little bit easier to get through stuff. But I really like these books. They're very well written. I would highly recommend all the Dresden File books. This guy, it's like the first book was good. The second book was, I don't feel like it was as good. It was still pretty good. Like the first book's like a 9. This one's like the second book was like an 8.5, and this one's like a 10. This book's excellent across the board. Like I really enjoyed it. I feel like this guy's like really in his stride now, getting through his stuff. But before I begin talking about the story, go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment, and let's get started. So we start off, and we kind of go like in media res, I guess, somewhat, where Harry and this like Knight Templar guy named Michael, they're cruising through Chicago super fast, and we find out that they've been like going about like shutting down hauntings for a while because something's got like the ghosts all up in a tizzy and stuff. And then they found out that there's another one that's happening at a nursery at Cook County Hospital, and they got to get there quick so the ghosts don't like kill children, right? Kill the babies. And so while they're racing there, Michael asks Harry about Susan. Susan is Harry's it's his girlfriend from like the previous book, and is like kind of romance interest from the first book. She's like a sexy Latina girl who runs like a magazine. I can't remember what the magazine's called. I don't think she even runs it. She's like but she's a writer for it. God, I don't remember what it's called. But it's all about the supernatural and paranormal, which is real because obviously wizards and Knight Templars and all this stuff. But you know, people don't believe it because they got the mundaneness going on, the banality or whatever. So, and then Michael's like grilling Harry about whether he loves her or not. And you may think this is just kind of like some funny throwaway stuff, but this conversation is like essential to like the plot, and not essential as in like it keeps coming up, but it's like this goes back to like the writing in this is excellent because they have this conversation at the very beginning, and this is relevant. It is like to the very end of this book, this conversation is extremely relevant. It's like some of the most relevant stuff that gets talked about. So it was so good. And then finally, because Harry reluctantly, because he's like, he's like a douchebag with no, he's like his mom like abandoned him to like a evil fairy, and like his dad died when he was young. So for him to be like, I love somebody is like, it's a lot. Like he's a broken man. So he very reluctantly like admits without, I don't think he even actually says it at this point. He's just kind of like, yes. And then Michael's like, yes, what? And he's like, yes, I do, to your question you previously asked. And Michael's like, that's no way to handle life. And Michael is badass as hell. He is like a Knights Templar, but not like the Assassin's Creed or like in real life or whatever. He is like the pure. He loves Jesus like so much in his heart and his power. He has like extremely strong magical capabilities because he's like a walking crucifix. So when you fight some of these like evil demons and stuff like that, they can't even stand looking at him because he shines with like the power of God. Like, and so there's a little bit of conversation in this book about like holy power and the different kinds of magical energy and stuff. And if there's gonna be vampires, there might as well be like literal God who gives power to knights on earth. And that's this guy. And he's got a fucking magic sword, or like a holy sword, because it's not magic. So he's got this holy sword, and it's just like, it's badass as hell. And he's fucking sweet. And he's got like his beautiful blonde, like Aryan wife. And they got like a whole bunch of fucking kids and stuff. It's pretty good. And so he's a great addition, especially because Harry is such like an anti-hero almost. So having this guy just be like this pure vessel and stuff, and he's written very well too. He's like written like a realistic person like this in this story. And he has his own kind of like moments of like character growth and stuff that occur later. So he's not just like, I don't know, Gary Sue, whatever you call it. Anyway, so they roll up to the hospital. They just like park in like the emergency line, throw on like Michael grabs like his bag with his giant sword, and then they make a beeline to the nursery. As they're rushing up there, they're taking the stairs because we get reminded that Harry and like technology do not mix because he has so much wizard powers, and like magic and technology do not mix at all. It can cause a lot of problems, like electricity and stuff. And when they get there, it's like dead silent. So there's not nurses, there's not clickety-clack, there's none of that stuff. And so Harry goes first because he's got some ghost dust and stuff. And the ghost dust can hold ghosts in place, so Michael can go ahead and like send it on its way or whatnot. And that's like send it on its ways and like end the ghost's existence. So ghosts are not like spirits per se. We learn that in this world, ghosts are the haunted like essences of people who like died a certain way or a very traumatic way, or there was like some very intense emotions, and that left like an imprint on the Never Never, which the Never Never is kind of like the magical world in this, but and it entails like all sorts of different planes, and so it's got ghosts and it's got like the Feywild essentially, and it's got a whole bunch of other stuff, and it's like it's a very like wild, chaotic, and dangerous place because it does not conform to like any rules of like normal physics or like banality or whatnot. So the ghosts hang out there, and then if they become strong, they like manifest into the real world. And there's been all these ghost sightings, and so they kind of talk about how there's like a loosening of like the veil, specifically in like Chicago, where they're at, between like the Never Never and the human realm, so that these ghosts are having an easier time like getting out and causing like mischief and whatnot. So good times. So they go and they find the lady ghost, and they confront her with the reality of her situation, telling her that she's a ghost and she's not alive. And there's like a whole backstory to this woman that they found out about because of I think Bob told them. Bob's like Harry's like magical assistant. He's a skull with like a very, very, very powerful and ancient spirit that like exists in it, because he hates being in like the Never Never, so he like hangs out with Harry and lives in this skull. And every now and then Harry lets him like go wild, and he loves sex, so he's also a great character. So she freaks out, obviously, and Michael goes to attack her, and they're able to drive her off by severing her arm. But then she starts attacking like the children from like beyond, from like the Never Never, and they're like, "Fuck, we got to go take care of her there, because she's gonna like strangle these children from there, because she has the veil between like life and death is like so thin because of like some shenanigans we haven't, they're like, what's causing? We got to figure out what's causing this so it doesn't keep happening." So they're like, all right, fuck, we got to go to the Never Never so we can save these kids. And it's like, it's super dangerous, as I mentioned. But also on top of that, Harry has like a deal with his fairy godmother, which is like, she's a fairy, so she lives in the Fae, and she is like dangerous as shit. And he's like, as soon as I enter that Never Never, she's gonna like sense that I'm there, and she's gonna come for like blood, because he had some sort of pact with her that he's like not keeping his end of the bargain. And fairies get very particular about this whole situation. So whatever, let's go. So at that point, we take a little divergence back in time. So earlier in the day, Harry's like at his office, and he meets up with some people about wizard stuff, like find my cat and shit like that. Nothing crazy. He gets a call from Susan, and she's very upset about him staining her up the previous night because he had to go hunt ghosts and shit. And then she's like, also, could you give me the story, because she's a hustler. She's like Lois to his Clark, if that, which is relevant because Superman's coming out soon, right? But or already came out when this video pops. Anyway. And Arcana, I wrote it down, thank goodness. So that's the name of her magazine, and the supernatural stuff and stuff. And she became like a national like star or whatever, because she wrote an op about like the werewolves and had some pictures and stuff from like the previous book. And people don't believe it's real, but it's like a tabloid magazine, and so it's like super well done and written well, and it's like very interesting, and people love it. So she's very good at her job. So she makes a very good living off that. And so he's like, hey, we can hang out tonight, so no worries there. And she's like, sex? And he's like, yes. And then they talk about Michael, and then they hang up, and then he's about to leave for the day when this like chick approaches him and tells him that if he doesn't help her, she will die tonight. So Dresden lets her in. We find out this chick's name's Lydia, and she tries to sell herself to Dresden for protection, and he's like, please stop. Then she puts on like a pour me at thing, and then she talks about like Cassandra Tears, which is Cassandra is like the oracle. It's like a Greek story. I'm not too familiar with it. I'm not really into Greek mythology, but I know it has to do with that and like future sight and whatnot. She'd always see tragedies, and the tragedies would always come true no matter what kind of situation. So Cassandra's Tears is because she would cry because she would see a future that was horrible that no one could stop. And that it's random, completely random, just kind of happens. And so she has this, she talks about seeing Dresden and her and like fire and all this other stuff. And that currently she needs help because she's being assailed by like spirits, like a specific nightmare in particular. And this catches Dresden's attention because he's like, oh, spirits, huh? He's still a little skeptical because he feels like she's playing some angle. And then she tells him about the vision, which he dismisses. Then in a moment of like complete despair, she gives him she's like in a complete despair, and so he finally is like, all right, here's a talisman. He gives her like this bracelet that protects against spirits that he's been using to fight the spirits all this time. And then he tells her about this church to go to, and to mention a man, like to mention Michael specifically. So she leaves. Then he gets a mysterious call, and he's like, all right, see you soon. Then Bob calls on their little like magic walkie-talkie thing they have set up, and it's about a ghost. And this is where he heads out to meet with Michael. So and this takes us back to like the beginning of the book, so that way we find out like how they found out about this thing and do this thing. And yeah, it was Michael. Anyway, or Bob. Anyway, back to the present. Michael and Dresden enter the Never Never. It's like old-timey Chicago, and then the ghost they sent here, who's like killing the babies, like bursts up out of the floor. So they fight and they eventually beat her, and they see this is like this crazy barbed wire thing like afflicting her that clearly is the reason why she's acting up and going mad and stuff. And so they ponder about this for a little bit, and they talk about how it has to be intentional. They then rush for the gate to get back out of the Never Never because it's like slowly closing or whatever, and I for some reason it's going to be a minute before they can like get back out. But then they hear some noises, and Ruh-roh, it's Dresden's fairy godmother and her like army of hellhounds, so they're in a lot of trouble now. So at this point, Lee, it's like L-E-A, so I think it's Lee, or Leia, I would say Lee. Anyway, she talks about a pact Dresden made with her when he was younger, and also about how the mother is somehow related to this whole thing. We don't get a lot of super details about this. Anyway, she draws Dresden to her with like her magic abilities, and then Michael mentions being unable to do anything because he would fight her, but then her and Dresden have like a pact, and because like the holy sword and his like righteousness, it's like, well, you dance with the devil you made or whatever, right? So it's like he can't really like, she's not doing anything like wicked per se or wrong. She's literally just doing like what is like normal, I guess. So Harry's like, that's fine, get out of here. And so Michael starts to go, and then he tricks the fairy, he tricks Lee into drawing him close so that he can use cold iron on her, which is one of the ingredients in like his ghost dust bag, because it grounds everything in like reality so hard, and like it's like fairy's weakness, which is like a time-honored tradition. At that point, he grabs Michael and pushes him through the gate, and they both go. And then they talk. Michael's like upset at him because he lied to Lee about like stuff. And he thinks it's wrong. Then Harry mentions that he is much more concerned that his fairy godmother knew exactly where Harry was going to be, because she shouldn't have been able to get to them because they really weren't there that long. And then they see the babies all crying, and so that means they're good and that they're safe, and that's all that matters. And then so the nurses all wake up because they were like under like a magic spell or whatever, and they see the men and they freak out, and so they take all their weapons, like the blasting wand and the rod and the staff and his giant sword, and they like toss them away from themselves, put their hands over their heads because obviously the police are going to show up and arrest them. Oh man. So next up, the boys talk about stuff while they wait for their ladies to come rescue them from prison. This is where we meet Charity, which is Michael's wife, as I mentioned before. She's 8 fucking months pregnant, so she shows up and she's pissed because she's tired of Harry like dragging Michael into all sorts of shady stuff because she's she's a woman of God as well. So she kind of yells at him, and then Susan shows up, and she's much more understanding. She's like, hey, what's up, spirit stuff? And he's like, you bet. And she's like, well, so much for a fucking date. And he's like, I'm sorry, but we can hang. And she's like, all right, let's do that. And then he almost tells her at that point that he loves her, especially after the conversation with Michael. But then, he has issues with everyone he's ever said he loved to dying or being disappeared or destroyed. And spoiler alert, that doesn't change here. So they kiss instead. They drive back to his place, and then they notice that cat, his cat, which he calls Mister, is not around, which is super unusual. And then Susan jokes about the ghosts concern. Oh, maybe it's ghosts or something. And she's wrong because it's vampires. So these vampire brother and sister show up. They're here with an invitation from Bianca, who's like the head vampire lady of the Red Court in Chicago, who has had like very negative experiences with Dresden in the past, and who she blames for like killing one of her like people she wanted to turn or something in the first book, even though it was technically her fault. Anyway, she absolutely hates him, and so this is like clearly some sort of trap, or some sort of like cat's paw, if you will. Inviting her, he's being invited as like a member of the White Council. And the White Council is like the super council of all the wizards in the world that is not like evil. And he's like the only White Council wizard in Chicago, or he's the highest ranked or whatever. So he is the representation in the city. So he's being invited to her like promotion ceremony or something, which is not like unusual. Like it's one of those things where it's like, okay, yeah, that's a thing. So this is not like totally out of whack. And then Susan gets like super excited. She's like, oh, you have to take me to this. And he's like, absolutely not. Anyway, so then the vampires leave, and then they like yell back. They have like a argument where Harry just like talks shit to him, and then they like hiss at him and leave. And then Susan drags Harry inside and gets his place all warmed up and whatnot. And so again, he's a wizard, so he can't have electricity, so he has to use like a fireplace, and he has to use candles to light things, and there's like nothing with electrical bits or whatever. It's like a gas stove and whatnot. Which still has electricity, but still. He's like boiling water with a cauldron over a fucking fireplace. Anyway, she really, really wants to go, and so she brings it up again. So they argue, and then Dresden's like, "It's 100% a trap," and she's like, "What about the promises of safety?" And he's like, "Vampires are cunning as shit, man. Like that promise of safety is only going to get you so far. Like it's definitely like the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law. So if you just so happen to get injured by accident, because accidents happen, then like that YOLO, what are you going to do about it? Like they technically didn't break their promise. Like they didn't like do anything, or maybe like someone else who's around did something, and like it wasn't them directly. So right." It's like a lot of that shady shit. So anyway, he then switches the conversation over to the White Council, and then regrets it, as now she's asking about that. She's like, "Wait, White Council? Tell me more about that." And he's like, "Fuck." So he's like, "What can I do?" And he's like, "Yes, I can fuck her brains out." And so he does. Harry's not doing good, as he usually is not doing good in these books. He's having a nightmare, and this nightmare is all about his fairy godmother, Lay, and this man. It's about how he like burned his master to death because he was involved in like the dark arts, and that Harry kind of was involved in the dark arts as well, but there's like some shady business about that. You can read more about that in the first book, to be completely honest. Because Harry killed him, there was like a whole thing with the White Council and other things, and he had like the sword of Damocles over his head for a while. He gets woken up by a knock on his door, and it's a super hard knocking because it's Michael. And so Susan, who's like naked and stuff, is like, "I'm gonna go take a nap in the bedroom, bye." And Harry gets up, gets dressed, he goes in there. The priest that that Harry sent Lydia to is, let's see, he called Michael, and he's like, "Hey, there was a spirit that attacked the church last night, and it was trying to break in and stuff." So they're like, "Fuck, so let's head over." So they get there, and the priest tells them about the girl, that she had some sort of seizure, and then the creature showed up. It was like smashing things, and it did like physical damage around the area, so it's very strong. And then it couldn't get in, and the priest tried to exorcise it, but it just like pissed him off even more, and eventually it left. But then by the time the priest was done like casting it away or whatnot, Lydia was like gone, so she took off. So then Dresden and Michael, they're like, "All right, we got to figure out what to do next. We're going to search for information, and we got to find this girl." Dresden at that point hits up an old retired necromancer. This is a pretty hilarious scene, I'm not gonna lie. He's been doing like fake seances for years. So he was like a necromancer. Necromancer is like black magic, it's illegal. And so he got told to like cut it out, or the White Council was gonna get involved, and like Harry was kind of keeping an eye on him. He's like, all right. So you can do like seances and stuff. You just can't summon like skeletons to like take things over or whatever, right? Like there's the magic law is never like has not been firmly defined by like this book. You just get some like inklings of like what you can and can't do. And like black magic seems a kind of nebulous thing. It's like, don't summon demons, no human sacrifice, no blood magic, stuff like that. So Dresden gets him to start talking about this whole thing with the veil between the worlds and how it's being torn away, and the guy's like super concerned. He like wrote a whole treatise about like the apocalypse and how the veil between the Never Never and the real world was going to cause some sort of like terrible nightmare to occur. And he's talking about how he's felt the nightmare before too, because he has a close connection with spirits, and that he's getting the fuck out of town, and that Harry should leave too. And then he gives Dresden like all his journals so they can have access to the same information, and he's like, "Hey man, good luck, I'm out of here." Dresden then gets accosted by the police, like as soon as he's walking out of this guy's house. It's Randolph. And I was like, who the fuck's Randolph? And Randolph is Murphy's new partner. So Murphy is the lady who works in like special investigation unit for the Chicago Police Department. She's kind of like a main secondary character. She's been in all 3 books, and she's played a predominant role in at least the second book. The first book a little less so. But this guy Rudolph like clearly does not like Dresden, and he's there with some sergeant who does know Harry and seems to have some sort of like likeness for him. Anyway, and we find out that I think his name's Malone, who was our previous partner from like the previous books, that he was injured, that his injury from book 2, like over the last year, he's like finally retired, and that Murphy is now the head of the special investigation unit, which is all the paranormal stuff. She wasn't before. And that, then we get like a refresher on her in case just as your first book, or you forgot from like the last book coming out, that she relies on Dresden a lot for all the supernatural stuff. So they talked to him a little bit. They talk about a crime scene across town, and where there's like a strong evil presence. And then so they head over there, and this at the crime scene, Harry notices there's all these like dead animals on the yard across the way, and it looks like they were all killed, possibly by this like nightmare spirit. So the person they're here to see is Mickey. Oh, Mickey is Murphy's old partner, and apparently he's gone like completely mad. So Dresden gets his wife Sonia to like invite him in, and there's a whole thing about like magic users being invited in, and like the strength of magic if you're invited in versus if you force your way in. It's like the whole vampire thing anyway. So he gets invited in so he can use magic in their home without any problems. And she leads him to the room where Mickey's at and then departs. And then Murphy's there and she shows him how Mickey is like, looks like he's completely possessed. And so Dresden's like, hey, you should get out of here. I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to figure out what's going on. So he gets all his like accessories and whatnot. And then he uses his wizard sight. So the wizard sight's a pretty dangerous thing. It shows you like the real force of the world, but it's like beautiful and haunting at the same time, kind of like it's like that Fey understanding, and you could be caught up with it. And there's things you see with wizard sight, which is also when like wizards look people straight in the eyes, they see like their souls, and it's like things they will never forget because you can't ever forget like the wizard sight. So if you see like dark things, it's like those things will haunt you for like the rest of your life. So it leaves this lasting impression, makes it pretty hard to like turn off and whatever. And that wizards have gone mad with this before. But he uses it and he sees that Mickey has that barbed wire around him, the same one that ghost from before at the nursery at the hospital had. So he's like, God, I gotta remove this thing. So he does. And as he's removing it, the barb tries to attack him and attach him, and he like is able to like rip it out, and then he throws it out the window and he blasts it with fire, destroying it, which like shakes the whole neighborhood. At that point, Murphy like rolls the fuck in and is like, what's going on? And then he sees her as an angel of wrath with a fiery sword with his wizard sight, and then he like cuts it out, gets his sight under control. At that point, Mickey's like recovered, sort of. He's got some emotional damage still, but he can like chat, and his wife comes in, and he's like normally he's not mad and doing crazy stuff and whatever. And so he talks to Murphy a little about the barb and about the nightmare, and he talks about how he's got to go and destroy it. Back at his apartment, Dresden fills Michael in on what's going on. Then Susan calls about a previous case. She talks about this demon summoner that they stopped, this Kravos guy. And then he heads down to the basement to consult with Bob, who again is the spirit friend who lives in the skull, about the nightmare. When Dresden brings up the nightmare and everything, Bob gets pretty quiet, and he seems like super nervous and refuses to like really engage. So Dresden starts going through what he knows out loud, and he's using like logical reasoning to work his way through. And eventually Bob reveals that Dresden is looking at this the whole wrong way, because someone is disturbing the spirits to cause the ripple in the Never Never, so that the spirits have an easier time crossing over, and that Dresden needs to like reevaluate what's going on with this. It's that point that Bob decides if Dresden is determined to do this, he's going to help him. They get into a conversation about the possibilities of what's going on. And they finally decide the most likely thing is that Lydia has something to do with this, because otherwise why would she show up? There's not like there's never like coincidences in like the magical world. There's always like fate and things tied together or whatever. So either she's not giving him all the information, or she's somehow accomplished this whole thing. So he's like, all right, I'm going to go figure this out. So he goes and tracks her down because she had his bracelet with him. And Bob's along for the ride. Let's see, Bob's along. Oh, no. Bob's going to go for a ride with Mister, the cat, so that he can reach out to some contacts because like there's a whole thing with Bob not wanting to go to the Never Never either, because he's got some like bad associations with that still. So Dresden's able to track Lydia down to like this old abandoned building in like downtown Chicago, and inside he gets into like this warehouse, and it's all dark, and he like senses her presence, and then there's like an old beat up van, or no, it's a new van. It's like a brand new van, and inside there's Lydia, and she looks rough, but she's totally alive. And he's like, huh. And then he gets rushed from the vampires, and it's vampires from earlier. It's Kyle and his sister, I forget her name, sister. So they go back and forth, and they're talking about Lydia and whatnot, and then Kyle says something about not realizing what she is or something, and then he knocks him back, and the sister shows up, and she's looking sexy as hell and wants to feed on Dresden, and so she launches at him, and he tries to blast her, but he misses, and he hits the back wall instead. She gets some of her saliva on him, and at least there's like 3 quarts of vampires, and at least with the red quart vampires, their saliva it causes like ecstasy. It's like a euphoric state of like lust or whatever, or desire to be with the vampire. And so that's part of like the vampire whole thing, is like they get their saliva on you, and then it's like you're drugged, and you gotta like, it takes a lot not to like let the vampire bite into you or whatever. And so he's resisting, and he's about to get fed on when the wall that he blasted earlier just completely collapses, and then guess what? The sun's still up. So she gets like burned the shit out of because the sun's up, and vampires can't be in the sun. And then Kyle's like fucking freaking out too, and so they hop in the van and they like vominos out of there, and then Kyle swears that he'll get revenge, the brother. And so Dresden's like, fuck this saliva. And he's like standing in the sunlight, but the sun's starting to go down. He's like, I gotta take care of this like real quick. So he heads out to the sun, and he stumbles home before the sun sets, and he's in like a real bad state because of the vampire poison. Mister's there, and he tries to get him to feed him, and Dresden tries to. He's logically thinking through what happened about Lydia, about all the connections, but eventually the poison like overrides him, and he falls into like a stupor state, and he remembers defeating the Kravos, the demon summoner, and it was like everything went great. They had a great plan. They were working with the special investigation department. Michael was there. But in his dream, he kind of is recalling like what actually happened, where they just like rolled in. He used like a voodoo doll on the guy, and they captured him, and they rescued all the people. But in the dream, it's becoming a nightmare, and everything goes wrong, and everyone dies, and he's being eaten by the demon and all this stuff. And then at some point, Mr. claws his face, which wakes him up from the dream. He stumbles down the stairs, heads into his summoning circle, and seals it because clearly the nightmare has gotten into his dreams, and he needs to protect himself. At that point, Bob heads out of Mr. into the skull. And he's like, hey, I know what that was. I was trying to eat you, and I know who the nightmare is. So they chat a bit about it, and the ghost, the nightmare, is likely the ghost of the demon that they killed, and it's because it's the only thing that's connected to Mickey and to Michael and to Murphy and to him. And so usually when demons get destroyed, they just like return to hell or wherever their place is in the Never. But since the Holy Sword killed it, it was permanently destroyed. So that could have possibly caused the demon to create like a ghost instead. And then they're talking about how it came and was able to affect Dresden's dreams and stuff. And they talk about how when you dream, sometimes you create like a pocket dimension inside the Never. So it gives him like a way into your head, even though the house is like super protected, so he can't get in there. Because he was in the Never, the spirit's able to move over there. And that's likely how it got to Mickey as well, because Mickey's home is like very strong with like banality or whatever, so like you can't just like mosey on in there either. And then part of like the nightmare was the monster, the demon, was like eating Dresden, and so because he was eating him, Dresden lost some of his magical capabilities, and that eventually he'll just like recover his magical capabilities. But right now he's like severely weakened because the monster was like eating him, and also the monster's got some like more strength. And then they talk about the barb and what that could be related to, and then they both kind of come to the conclusion that it probably has something to do with like the vampires, specifically Bianca. She's probably somehow involved, even though she's not a wizard, but there's got to be something there. They don't have enough proof to go get help from like the White Council to attack Bianca and take care of that whole situation. So they got to figure out a way to do that. And they still have no idea how Lydia is like connected to the whole thing. But at some point, Dresden kind of like puts it all together and is like, wait, if Mickey and me and Michael, that means Murphy's going to be. So I got to run off and check on her. So he tries to call Murphy, and he finds out that someone's pretending to be him has already called her. And so he races over to the police department. And of course, it's the Nightmare who stole some of his magic, so it can like take his form. So he heads over there, but it's too late because the Nightmare already put Murphy into like a tormented state. And Harry gets there right when she's like put into that state. And so then he gets blasted as well, and then with like Harry's own magic, right? Because he stole so much of it. And then he like wanders off, and then Dresden tells the sergeant that he needs a book from the demon slaying case, and the guy's like, oh, I don't know about that, man, that evidence, there's some like sketchy stuff with that. And he's like, what do you mean there's sketchy stuff with it? It's like, I don't know if I can really tell you. And he's like, look, I just need the journal, I need to get like the demon's true name essentially so that he can help Murphy and everything. And so the guy's like, all right, sounds good. And then also she needs to be moved like in the morning someplace safe where the Nightmare can't get to him anymore. And like the best place to do it would be in Mickey's, because again, Mickey's place is like safe, and like the Nightmare cannot get into there at all unless he's invited in. He then puts her to sleep, like a magical sleep, so that she's not in like torment anymore, but she still has some like emotional damage from like all this stuff the Nightmare is doing, like the same stuff that it did to Dresden and also clearly to Mickey. And that she's gonna like wake up and still, it's when she finally wakes up, it's gonna be pretty rough. He then seals her in a magic circle so that she'll be protected for the rest of the night, because the Nightmare, like the ghost, can only come out at night apparently. And so he's like, fuck. Okay, so they got Mickey, they got Murphy, they attacked me. Next up is Michael, so I gotta head over there. So Dresden runs over to Michael's place, and he wakes him. He like bangs on the door a whole bunch of times, and finally Michael comes down. And he's like feeding a baby, and it's like, Jesus Christ, you guys just had a kid. Like, you're having another one. And so he fills Michael in on everything that's going on, because it's like late at night. And then Michael goes to put the baby down, and then Dresden sees a note from Charity, because he's like, we gotta make sure. And he's like, Michael's like, everyone's fine, everyone's sleeping and doing good. And he's like, huh. And then he comes in, and he's looking around, and he sees this note from Charity, and she stepped out to get some food from the grocery store because she's pregnant and she's got cravings and stuff. And so Michael and Dresden are like, fuck. And then Michael's like, we got to go right now. And then Dresden's like, what about your kids? And he's like, God will provide a way. And they open the door, and standing there is the priest, who's like, I just felt like I needed to come over here. And then Michael like gives like Dresden like the wink and the nod with tapping his nose kind of thing. And Dresden's like, get the fuck out of here. Like, I don't want any more of your bullshit. Because God's always looking out for Michael's family because he's righteous. And so they rush off to the nearby grocery store. And there they find the van that Charity drives around, and they bust in. Michael's like totally losing. He just like runs into the grocery store and runs around. Dresden finds out some more information from like the cashier lady that Charity and it looked like Dresden were here earlier. And then they headed out to like look at the car and whatnot, and then wandered off. And he heads out alone because Michael is like storming around the grocery store, and he's like, I don't have time for that bullshit. And he sees the nightmare dragging Charity up into the graveyard nearby by her hair, and follows quickly. So he has to fight his way through a whole bunch of spirits because, again, the whole thing with the veil of the Never Never, and they're in a graveyard, and it's like nighttime, and it's like fucking raining at this point. And he's so weak, and he's having a hard time like pushing through and whatnot, and it's raining like super fucking hard. So eventually he finds Charity in the nightmare, and then he fights, and he almost gets killed, but then his godmother shows up to make a deal with him, and it's like, goddamn, another one. And he tells him, she then tells him that the answer to what he's looking for is all around him, and takes off. And he's like, you son of a bitch. Michael then shows up and gives Dresden a crucifix for Charity, and then he starts fighting the nightmare. Dresden gives Charity the crucifix, and she's like, I think my water broke. And it's like, fuck, she's having this baby. And so the nightmare at some point gets Michael to drop his sword, and he runs over about to kill Charity, but then she uses the crucifix to like really push him back, because she also has faith magic because she's super religious as well. So Dresden then realizes at this point that the trick is the running water, because there's something about running water and vampires and this nightmare or whatever. So he's able to like use enough power just to knock him into like this river in like the graveyard that is like flowing like crazy because it's like torrential rainpour, and this sends the nightmare back into like the Never Never. Michael then picks up his wife and leaves. Dresden grabs Michael's holy sword and all the other stuff, and at that point the godmother shows up, and she's like, all right, time to go. And Dresden is like, I'm gonna get you, I'm gonna fight you, I'm gonna fight off your hellhounds with the sword. And Michael's like, no, don't do that. And then when he tries to do it, that burns his hand, and he drops the sword. And at that juncture, Lade, the godmother, is like, thank you, and like picks up the sword, and she's like, I'll see you later. And so she takes off, and then Michael's like, what the fuck? Because apparently the sword can only be used in like righteous ventures and to fight evil and whatnot. And all Lade was doing was like going along with a contract that Dresden had already like agreed to. He's like, all right, give me this thing and I'll go with you. And so him trying to fight his way out of that contract is not something God's cool with, because God is like, you do not make like oaths or whatever, you don't swear and then don't follow through. So like him trying to use the sword to do that is an unrighteous act. And so the sword is like, no, go fuck yourself, I'm not going to work. And so that she's able to get the sword, which is very sad. Everybody goes to the hospital here, and Michael and Charity go off because obviously her water broke and she's giving birth, so they do their thing, and then Dresden gets seen somewhere else. And then he gets like sassed like real hardcore because he's faking his injuries, and he's like, the fuck? And then he realizes that Lee healed him completely, which is like very concerning, because fairies don't do anything for no reason. And the fact that she has so much power in like the real world is also kind of a scary thing, and it helps him like re-emphasize the fact that the veil between the Never Never and the real world is like getting thin, and that's going to cause some problems, which again is very important, and it's essential to like understanding stuff that happens later, or like why things can occur that happen later. And then he finds Michael, and Michael's all distraught because he lost his sword, and then his son might not make it through the night, and there's complications with Charity's birth and stuff, but she's stable, and then she probably can't have kids anymore because of the stress and everything that was going on. And then Dresden tells him that they've both been fooled, that there's someone pulling the strings on the nightmare, that someone's doing all this stuff, and that's where the barbs are coming from and stuff. And then also that demons aren't as calculating as this nightmare has been. So they discuss, because demons are just like forces of nature. They're just like, I'm going to be a demon, do evil shit in this world. They don't like think and have long drawn out like plans and whatnot. So clearly something else is going on and driving this like demon nightmare thingy. They discuss that, and then Dresden finally convinces Michael to keep fighting, and so they head out. At this juncture, Harry gets a summoning circle ready, and Michael, like down in his basement of his place while Michael waits upstairs, and he starts to summon the ghost. At this point, Susan calls and says it's super urgent, but Harry's like, I'm kind of busy, bro, can you just tell her I'll call her later? Anyway, Michael tells her that, and then Harry gets the demon trapped in there. Does anyone behind its kill? Oh, he asks if the creature denies that there's anyone behind its killings, that it's all because they want to do the killings, and the killings are all about it and whatnot. And then Harry feels through the door. infusing the demon with power. He talks about the barbs, and there's clearly someone doing these barbs things, and he feels like a presence of these barbs in the background, but he can't exactly figure out what's going on with that. Only go after. Okay, so then he makes some sort of deal with the demon, or he uses like some of his power to like tie the demon to him. So the demon nightmare thing cannot attack anybody else, like the spirit, essentially. The ghost can't attack anyone else. It can only attack Harry, and once Harry's dead, then it can like go back to torturing other people. But for now, everyone else is safe as long as Harry's around. And then he sends it away. He goes up and tells Michael about all this stuff, and then he notices the invitation to the vampire ball that he got all the way back at the beginning of the book, and he's like, I got a plan. We're going to go there. Because he's like super convinced that Bianca has something to do with all this bullshit, and he wants to go find out. So then they head over to the party. Michael's dressed up like a fucking Knights Templar with armor and all that shit, and he's got like blades and whatnot. No holy sword, but everything else. And then Dresden, at the beginning of the chapter, is wearing like a very mysterious costume. Michael, before they can head out, Michael's like, let's say a prayer. And Dresden's like, bro. And Michael's like, shut the fuck up, I'm praying. So he does. And then even Harry's like, okay, I felt something. And again, it's like Harry recognizes that like God exists in this universe, and then he has powers, and it's based on faith. And Michael's faith is so strong that like, all right, cool, he's giving us something. And this calms Dresden down and all this stuff, and he thinks about God and about all, has like a thought process himself. So they head in, and pretty quickly they run into Thomas. Thomas is a master he's a noble of the White Court of vampires, right? Because there's white, black, and red. And apparently the Black Court is like super struggling and stuff. And as I mentioned before, Bianca is a member of the Red Court. So they talk with Thomas about the party and stuff. Thomas has this like chick, Julian, I want to say, who is like super hot, like a supermodel hot, who's hanging out and whatnot. And Harry like touches him because he's got some sort of magic spell running that if he touches somebody, he can tell, because he recognizes the aura of the nightmare. He can see like anyone who's connected to that, and Thomas is not, so he's like clean. So they all head in to the manor for this party, and just like Harry's representation from the White Council, this Thomas fella he's part of the White Court, so he's like the representation from the White Court coming for like her coronation or her like upgrade in the Vampire Society or whatever. And then finally we learn that his costume is like some ridiculous like vampire costume with like the fangs and like the cape, and then he's wearing like a blue like prom suit from the 70s underneath, and it's all there just to like piss people off, and you bet vampires are super pissed off about that. So Harry stands there and waits for a fight to begin, but then Thomas like eases the tensions a little by being an asshole to Bianca. She then steps forward and trades barbs with Harry and Thomas about, they just like talk shit to each other, and then at that point Michael and Dresden head over to Thomas, and they thank him for helping out, getting everything set up and whatnot, so they can get in without having like to be jumped like immediately. And then Thomas gets distracted because there's some other vampires who are trying to poach his date, this Julian chick. And then they start moving around, Harry and Michael. So Thomas goes off to take care of that, and then Harry and Michael talk about, or Harry points out that, hey, they're trying to be very subtle about it, but they're trying to surround us like very sneakily. So they start to move around, and then he runs into Kyle and that chick, his twin sister, and they taunt Dresden, and then the sister gets burned or something because she tries to touch Michael, and he's full of like holy energy, and so she's like, ah! And like, we'll get you, motherfucker. And then they run off pissed again because they're a bunch of assholes. And then all the other vampires, once they see this, they back off. They're like, oh shit. At that point, they're handing out some drink, and Harry takes a drink of it. Obviously, Michael's like, fuck this drink. And then Thomas is walking up with his date, and he's like, oh, hey, you probably shouldn't be drinking that. It's poisoned. And Harry's like, yep. And so he goes to the corner and like vomits it all up, but he absorbs some of it, and it's the whole vampire like lust thing, mind control thing that makes you very compliant, like ecstasy or whatever. And so Thomas is like, all right, good luck. And then Michael and Dresden talk about if they should trust Thomas or not, and they're like, well, he seems like a nice enough fella, but we definitely don't trust him because vampires and whatnot. They always have their own like schemes and whatnot. So anyway, so it's like, okay, there's two people here that are not vampires. There's like that guy dressed like a Centaurian, and then there's this other person dressed like Oliver Twist or something. So anyway, they go to the Centaurian guy, and it's dun dun dun, it's a dragon, of course. So Michael knows him, and he's like, oh, hey, you're that motherfucker. And they go back and forth about this other dragon that Michael slew at some point. Sasses him, talks about that. Michael, the dragon slew. Okay, they go back and forth, and the dragon guy leaves. He doesn't really show up the rest of the like this book. It's like set up for a future book, clearly. Next up is this other guy. Oh, Hamlet. There's this other person dressed like Hamlet. As they're looking around, they find this woman wearing a red cloak who approaches them, and then Harry jumps at her because she's like sneaking up on him, and dun dun dun, it's Susan, and it's like, fuck, what are you doing here? And she's like, oh, I falsified an invitation, and he's like, bro, that is not a good idea, because obviously with the invitation and whatnot, there's like protections and whatnot, and she's like, no, it's all good. I just came to get a story and stuff, and no one cares. And it's like, dude, you know, it's like, you're fucked. Like when they figure out this is going on, and then guess who shows up? That's right, Lee shows up, and she's like, "What up, everybody?" And then Harry starts having like a real fit. Like he's weakening super fast. Like his magic's gone. He's all tuckered out and tired. He has some of that poison and whatnot. And then Lay says something about broken paths, turning his powers against him. So there's also pacts, not paths, like pacts. Anyway, so this broken pact, like he keeps breaking pacts with her, and because of that, there's like rules of magic or some bullshit, and so that's also wearing him out and whatnot. So he kind of collapses, and then Michael and Susan help him up, and he's like, hey, did you do anything? And let's see, protection. Also, Michael would have sensed it. Oh, yeah. And she's like, no, I can't do anything because of the protection guaranteed by like the pact or by like the invitation and whatnot and all that stuff. Plus, Michael would have sensed it. And Michael's like, yeah, she didn't do anything. This is just you like eating yourself, I guess. And she reiterates that this is Harry. This is like what your comeuppance is for like breaking pacts with magical creatures and whatnot. And that it's going to keep getting worse until like and the damage is going to keep being done until their deal is like done and completed. So Susan goes back and forth with Lee for a little bit. And she's like Harry's like literally like dying at this point. And so, Susan goes back and forth with Lee about like what can be done and like, you know, the price. And then Harry's like, don't do it. It's not worth it. Like, it's always like a bad deal for you. And finally, like Susan's like, I'll give you like a year of memories to recover Harry. And then she turns to Michael and he's like, I want my sword. And she's like, absolutely not. If I give you your sword, you're going to break the oath immediately, and you don't have to keep an oath with me because you're a fucking man of God and whatnot. So it's like, yeah. And then she's like, what about your children? Give me one of your children, and I'll heal Harry and whatnot. Let's see. Okay, yeah. Finally gives up memories, recover Harry. Assurance of Michael. Oh, yeah. He wants the sword. Okay, what else? Children. Okay, yeah. Okay, then she flutters away, and he's like, too bad I didn't get the sword. Then Harry starts feeling a lot better, and the two of them look at Susan, and Susan's like, who are you guys? So the boys try to help Susan remember. Of course she doesn't, because she's locked up with the fairy magic going on. Still, she needs to get the fuck out of there because she's not here with the correct invitation. They start to drag her out of there, and then the Hamlet guy shows up on the stairway leading out of the like area where they're in, and it ends up being a woman, sort of, because it's a Marva, who is a member of the Black Court of vampires, right? So there's 3 courts, and this is the one that's been severely damaged. And this is because Michael went around killing a bunch of her kids at some point, which really pissed her off. And so she mentions that Harry is here and he's got one invitation. And so who's the invitation going to belong to? Is it going to belong to Michael or is it going to belong to Susan, right? And so Harry is like, man, go fuck yourself. And so she tries to grab Susan, but Susan's got holy water for some reason and garlic. And so they threaten each other. And we find out that she's a wizard and that she's actually the wizard who put the barbs in all the people, right? So she's definitely involved in this nightmare creature, whatever is going on with that. Marva attacks the 3 of them. And they fight back and they hold her off, and then she runs away. At this point, Thomas and his lady come up, and then Bianca makes like some big show about how it's gift time, right? Because you get gifts for everyone who got invited here, like the dragon and Lee and Marva and Thomas, whenever they all get gifts, including Dresden. And Dresden's like, fuck. And this is when Dresden like realizes, which we've already figured out, that this whole thing is a fucking trap. And he thought it was a trap, and now it's like confirmed that it's a trap. And somehow they are going to get Dresden to make the first move on attacking Bianca and her people, which is going to break the security contract or whatever. And so Bianca starts giving gifts. First she gets the dragon. He goes up, he gets his little gift, and he's super pleased. And then Thomas goes, he leaves his girl with Dresden, is like, please watch out for her. And then she starts talking. Apparently, her and Thomas have an actual relationship. It's not just like he's she's enthralled to him or whatever. And that Thomas actually saved her from being taken by Bianca, which made Bianca super mad. And we also find out that Thomas is like a lesser noble, like he's kind of like a bastard son of the Lord of the White Court or something, which has a vampire. I don't know how that works, but okay. So he's he's the lowest noble, and so this is also like an insult from the White Court, like him showing up here on like several different ways. And then she's like, hey, you should really team up with Thomas for real so we can all get out of here. And finally, he's like, all right, fine. So Thomas comes back, and he got a one-way ticket to Hawaii for one person, right? So message loud and clear. Then Harry goes up, and she brings out a coffin with his name on it, of course. And Harry calls her out for working with Marva and such. And then, and how he's kind of figured out the whole trap thing and whatnot. And then he goes back down, and he's like thinking about how to get out of the trap and whatnot. Leia goes up there. She gives Bianca Michael's sword, and then she gets something she wants. She gets like a little doodad or something. I don't think we ever find out exactly what it is. And then Marva goes up, gets the sword, and then they like bring out Lydia. And so Marva gets Lydia and the sword. And it's like, oh. So Marva is going to use the sword to kill Lydia, who's an innocent girl, which is going to break it. And we find that out because Michael and Dresden are like talking about it and thinking about it. And then also Lydia's going to die. So of course Michael takes a step forward because he's going to do something about it. And then Dresden goes, and Thomas is like, YOLO, pulls out his sword. And there's a moment where Thomas is like, don't do the dumb thing, just let her die. It's just one person. And then Michael's like, I'm getting my fucking sword back. Thomas is like, oh, fuck. So he pulls out his sword. They're all teamed up on it. And then Leia and the dragon, they like just stand back and watch the vampires get ready to fight. So they start the fight. So they fight it their way up the stairs. Harry blasts the sword out of Marva's hand, and then Michael drives her off the dais with his like faith magic or whatever. Dresden then grabs Lydia, and they start to head down. Then Bianca comes up. She grabs up Thomas's girl and makes a deal with Thomas that Thomas will betray Dresden and whatnot, and that she'll release the girl. And so he's like, there. And so he pushes Susan into like a pile of vampires, right? Because she's still around doing stuff, and just like nopes out of the whole situation, leaving just Michael and Dresden during this time. So then Dresden is able to grab onto the rest of his reserve magic, and he blasts the whole fucking place with fire, like burning vampires down, destroying things. There's like an explosion in the house. And then he's like totally tapped out at this point. Like he's about to have his heart stop. So Michael prays for a way out, and it opens up. And as like the way opens up, he is able to resuscitate Harry with some CPR. He picks him up, and Lydia, and carries them out. And they run into Leia, and she's like, oh, I don't want you to be damaged because I want you for later, lick lips and all that gross stuff. And I'm helping you get out of here. And so Michael takes Dresden and Lydia back, throws them in his truck, and then he runs back in to find Susan. A bit later, Harry wakes up in his room. He vomits because he's thinking about killing all those people with fire, like all the people that were being eaten up by vampires and whatnot, because they were innocents in this whole situation. He showers. At that juncture, Michael comes in, and he mentions Lydia's here, and he never was able to find Susan, that she's still missing. And then him and Michael have a conversation. Michael's like, I gotta stop. Not getting that sword, because the sword got thrown into like the whole thing with the vampires and whatnot, into the melee. And so he's like, not having the sword, maybe it's time I stop. I gotta look out for my family, and maybe this is a message from God and whatnot. And Dresden is like, all right, yeah, that makes sense. And so Michael's about to leave, and then they get this like crazy knock on the door, and it's Thomas, and they're like, betrayers. So they drag him in there, and they're about to kill him, and he's like, wait, hold on, I have information on Susan. Also, look at this. And he like opens up this package, and it's the sword. And so then Michael like goes and apologizes to God because he got his sword back, so that's a sign. And so he's going to keep fighting. And then Thomas finally tells him that Bianca not only has Julian, his girl, but she has Susan as well, and that he wants to team up to get them. And they're like still a little distrustful of what's going on, especially because he essentially betrayed them. And he's like, look, man, it's not like a real betrayal. Like, I was just kind of like looking out for my girl and whatnot. And so they decide they're going to team up to take care of that. So, all right, let's do it. First thing they need to do is they need to get the understanding of the lay of the place, because Thomas has never been inside, Dresden's never really been inside. They don't want to just like stumble in there ad nauseum, so they got to figure out kind of like what's going on with that whole situation. And who's going to know that but Lydia? So we're just going to wait for her to wake up, because she's actually been inside and she can give them some information. Thomas goes to take a shower, and then it looks like Lydia is starting to wake up, so Dresden walks over, and ruh-roh, she's possessed with the nightmare. Wah, wah, wah. And the nightmare possessing Lydia grabs Dresden and flings him across the room. So the possessed Lydia starts to fight everybody and is beating up everybody. At some point, Michael gets a grip on her, and Dresden tries an exorcism, which does not work. And then Michael gets hit and breaks a rib or whatever. And then she's like choking out Dresden, and that's when he finally, as he's like starting to pass out, he realizes what his mistake was, that he was missing something the whole time, that this is not the ghost of a demon, that this is actually the ghost of Kravos, the guy who summoned the demon, and that he just took the demon's form. And so as Dresden's about to die from being choked out, he doesn't, because Thomas is using his white court seduction powers on Lydia, which is, on the mortal form of Lydia that's possessed by the nightmare. So because Lydia's like enraptured with like ecstasy or whatever, she starts to like loosen, and then Dresden creates like a circle, like a magic circle, so that he has time to exercise his works and whatnot. So let's see, Thomas outtakes, Dresden stops him. Oh yeah, Thomas is about to kind of bite into Lydia and whatnot, but Dresden stops him, and then they recover. And let's see, they all chill. Oh, no. Okay, yeah. So then he's able to like drive Kravos out. Shoot honest first the kids and the girl help. But how are they gonna get in? Okay, yeah. So he's able to drive the nightmare out of Lydia. She passes out. Then he has to stop Thomas from like biting into her. And then they sit down and have like a little conversation about everything that's going on. They figure out that Kravos must have killed himself in prison to become a ghost, and that's because some information that Murphy and some other people, when they were like the sergeant who got him some of the information on, who got him like the book of secrets, so they get the demon's name. They were all being super sketchy about Kravos and about the investigation of Kravos and all that stuff. So clearly he must have killed himself and turned himself into a ghost. And then he probably had help from Marva and Bianca, because Marva's kind of like a wizard. She's got like magical powers on top of being a vampire. And so it's like, all right, so we got to go to this vampire house. And we got to finally beat Bianca and defeat her and whatnot. And they got to go in there. They got to rescue the girls, rescue any kids that are left and whatnot, and just make sure everyone's going to be okay. Take care of Kravos, let's see. But how are they going to get inside? There's going to be, Bianca's got a lot of connections in the city, so even the fire was kind of like underreported. And that they're not going to be able to just like mosey on in, because there's also human guards, so even if they're just killing vampires, there's going to be humans there as well. And so, regretfully, Dresden is like, well, I guess we got to take the Never Never to get over there. So they grab Bob as like a guide, and then they head out. So they travel around the Never Never for a while, and then just as they're about to make it out to where the vampire, where Bianca's home is, like the connection from from the Never Never into Bianca's home, using Bob as like a guide, Lay shows up, of course. So they run for it. There's like a bridge that leads out of like the fairy realm where she's at, where they'll have a little bit more power to like fight back against her. And Thomas and Michael are able to make it, but Dresden gets roped. He gets garroted, essentially, and dragged back off the bridge for freedom. At this juncture, Harry gets the boys to throw nails all around everywhere, and the fake creatures all back the fuck up because, cold iron and whatnot is like anathema to their existence, because it's so anti like magical powers and whatnot, that if they're able to get that situation, if they touch it, it's going to cause a lot of damage. And then Lay like screams at him about how like the fairy queen is going to be enraged that they brought cold iron into like her realm, and then Dresden's like, no, it's just aluminum, and the whole thing was just a distraction. So Harry at that point takes time and he swallows this poison mushroom. And then they talk about how he's going to be dead soon and that magic can't stop it. And Lay's pissed because she wants Dresden, right? She's like, you're so fucking crazy. And then Michael pulls out like an antidote, and it's not a pure antidote, because even with the antidote, he's still going to need like hospital care to like not be poisoned. So at that point, Michael's going to make a trade with her. So she's going to leave Harry alone for a year and a day, and then Michael's going to give her the antidote. That's the deal. So she finally agrees, and so Harry gives Michael gives Harry the antidote. He takes it, and then they're about to leave, but then Lay summons a whole bunch of fairy creatures, and she's like, I promised I wouldn't do anything to Dresden, but there's a lot of people here who owe me favors, and what they do is up to them. It's like, that sneaky son of a bitch. So they, let's see, okay, so then Michael stands to like guard the bridge with his magic sword, and Tom, because his ribs are busted up, and Thomas is like, let's go, and then Dresden's like, I don't trust this guy, you stay. So Thomas stays too to fight with Michael, because part of the thing is these fairy creatures are after Dresden, so they're going to stop them from crossing this bridge to get to Dresden. But if Dresden can get out of the Never Never by getting into Bianca's place, then they'll stop fighting them to get through, because he's not here anymore. Right. So then with Bob and Harry, they're able to find the entrance into Bianca's place, and right as Dresden's like opening it up, Bob's like, hey, I got something you probably shouldn't do this. There's something amiss here. And he's like, Harry's too engaged with trying to use like his limited amount of powers to get into Bianca's place. And that's the reason Bob was warning him, is because dun dun dun, it's another trap. Bob was warning against. So he gets in there. Bianca gets super excited that he's there, and all of her vampire minions like grab him up and drag him off. He wakes up later. He's naked as shit. And it's been hours or something. Justine, that was her name. I finally wrote it down. So Justine, Thomas's girlfriend's there. She's all naked and stuff too, and she's like losing her mind. She has bite marks all over her. Talks about how the vampires have been beating on her and stuff, and then she crumbles out. Next, we see Rachel, the girl from book 1, who is the whole reason Bianca's involved with Harry in the first place. She's a ghost. Clearly, some connection to her and Bianca's caused her to be here and to be haunted and all this crazy shit. And so just because there's like so much emotion involved and whatnot, and then he can see that she's tormented by being here because she doesn't want to be here, which and so then she leaves. Then Kravos kind of taunts him. I think he possesses Justine, starts taunting him, tells him that the poison prevented the vampire, kind of gives him some information. He's like, yeah, the vampires were going to eat you up, but then that poison, every time they got close to you, they got like super sick, and they were like, fuck this, let's just throw them down there. And then he like teases and taunts him and says, ooh, hoo, hoo, the vampire's got something for you. Then Kravos, the nightmare, leaves. At that point, Justine, it's like, comes, she's back in her body. She's crying. And then Harry sees some movement in the corner, and he's like, oh, shit, that's Susan. And he runs over to get her, and Justine's like, don't do it, you're going to regret it. And that's because Susan is now a vampire. Or, like, on her way to becoming a vampire, because she's not quite full vampire yet. So she won't officially turn into like a vampire in the Red Court until she kills somebody, and that's like, I guess, the way the Red Court does things. So Justine, at this point, because Susan's awake, runs and hides in the corner because she doesn't want to get killed. And then Susan keeps mumbling how she's thirsty and all this stuff, and Harry's got to come up with a scheme, because not only has Susan lost her memories of Harry and everything that's going on, but now she's a vampire who just wants to feed on this like random fella or whatever. And so, as usual, Harry comes up with a scheme. So he is going to try to wake up Susan's true memories. So if you remember me talking earlier on about wizard sight, well, when a wizard looks someone directly in the eye, they share like some sort of crazy bond where they are matched. They see into each other's souls, and this is something as good before, and that's why wizards tend to not look people directly into the eyes, and vampires kind of have like a weird power with that as well. Anyway, so because they soul gazed, she has true memories of Harry that cannot be erased even with fairy magic. So what Lee did is she put some sort of barrier or boundary around these memories of Harry in her mind so that she would not be able to access them. So Harry's going to go for like broke and try to push through and access those memories. He does some magic stuff and starts pushing, and she's getting hungrier and closer to biting his neck, like licking his neck and stuff, and he's starting to really struggle with the whole situation because he's like cannot get through the lock, and so right as she's about to bite him, he finally gives up all his like pretentiousness and tells her that he loves her for the first time ever, which I told you that was irrelevant all the way at the beginning of the book. And this does it. This allows him to like shatter the barrier and push through, which gets Susan not only the memories that lay supposedly like blocked off back, but relieves all memories and kind of brings her back out of her like vampire stupor that she's like so enthralled with getting blood. And so he says it some more, which helps it. And then finally Susan gets back, and she's thirsty. It's really hard to control, but she's able to do it. He then fills her in everything that's occurred in the last little bit, and then she's like, what can we do about it? And then he's like, I have another wild idea, because that's how because I always got wild ideas. And it's like, I'm going to invite Kravos in my dreams, because this is how we're going to do things. So a little bit later, Harry enters his nightmares. Kravos shows up as Ghost Kravos and like beats the shit out of him, taunts him, and then Harry dies. And then Kravos is like super excited, but then he comes back, and Kravos is like, the fuck? And that's because, and then at that point, Harry's ghost knocks him out. Because Harry died, so he's a ghost. And so then Harry Ghost and Harry Real Life, they team up and they beat the shit out of him, and then Harry eats the nightmare to get his powers back and also steal the powers of Kravos. Which is pretty awesome. And the ghost is like, all right, I fulfilled my end of the bargain. I'm going on to like whatever bullshit ghost thing. And it's like, awesome. And then he's like, hey, don't die this time, motherfucker. Then he wakes up. We find out that Susan was waiting by Harry until he died and then brought him back with like CPR. So CPR for the win twice in this book. At that point, he has to get Justine out of her hiding place, but he's got like all his magical powers that Kravos stole. Plus, he doesn't have like the bond breaking magic anymore because that got like resolved with Susan's gambit. Plus, he has Kravis's power, so he's like juiced the fuck up a lot more than he's been in a long time. So he drags her out, he gets everybody closed, he blasts the door open, and then Kyle and his sister rush in. Harry blasts sister against the wall, and then Susan grabs Kyle, like tosses him at the sister because she's got some of that like pre-vampire strength or whatever, and they burst into each other. They turn into like their bat vampire forms and start fighting each other, and then Harry burns them the shit down, finally killing those two assholes. Out in the hallway they find Bob and all of Harry's stuff, and it's like, why is Harry's stuff just like lying here in the basement of this like vampire mansion? And Bob mentions that he may have lied to the vampires, saying that if they touched any of his stuff it would explode in like some magical fire fury thing. So once he has everything, Justine points out that Susan has disappeared, and then mentions that Bianca has some sort of like mind control capabilities, and that's how she got Susan down there in the first place, that even though she's not a full vampire, she has some sort of control over Susan as like a thrall. So they head up the basement, the door is open, leading to like the main foyer, and Harry's like, all right, it's another trap. Here we go. So he hands Bob over to Justine and says, like, protect her, I'm gonna go figure this out. So he heads out, and there's Bianca with a bunch of vampires, and then a whole bunch of like, it seems like human thralls, like these guys with guns show up, and then he laughs at them, and then Bianca gets like super mad and is like, kill this motherfucker. And so they have a standoff. So they first thing first, they blast away at Harry, and he uses his like shield bracelet or whatever to reflect or to block all the bullets, and then the guys shooting the guns are like, fuck this, and so they all run off, and then Bianca and him like trade magical powers at each other, because apparently Marva's been training Bianca in some like vampire magic. At that point, Bianca wants a compromise, and then some homeboy like rolls in, and it's like, who's this motherfucker? And it's like, this guy is a witness because he like broke some treaty or something which could cause like a war between the vampires and the White Council and whatnot. And so this guy's just here as a witness. He's not going to do anything. He's just going to go like report in and whatnot. And so she says that Harry can take himself and Justine out, and that he's going to leave him alone, but she gets Susan, or else there's war. And Harry's like, how about go fuck your compromise? she like screams and then sends minions at him, and Harry fights them off. He's like killing them, and then at some point he starts to realize that he's starting to tap out because he's like exerting so much magic, and the burst he got from Kravos and eating Kravos is just a little bit, but he like hasn't slept well in days, and he's been like poisoned multiple times, and the poison's still in him. He still hasn't recovered from like the poison he took, like all this other crazy shit that's going on. And so he's like, all right, there's only one sensible thing left to do. So it was badass. Sorry. So what he does is he creates like a little circle, and he gets down on his like hands and knees, and he summons all the ghosts of all the people that have been killed in this vampire manor, and it is a fucking lot. And the only reason he's able to do this is because Bianca and Marva set up her own, essentially Bianca, by messing around with Marva and messing around with the veil and trying to create this ghost and trying to get revenge on Harry with Kravos and stuff. She set up like the weapon of her own demise, because the veil is so weak, Harry's very easily able to summon like every ghost of everyone who's ever been just killed by these vampires here, which is a fucking lot, including Rachel, who is pissed as shit, and give them enough like corporal powers to be able to attack the vampires, and they kill the shit out of the vampires. And then Harry starts moving up on Bianca, like casting spells at her, and then finally Bianca's trying to grab Susan and like run away, and then Susan starts like fighting back a little bit, and then Harry summons Rachel, and Bianca's like, fuck you, and then Rachel's like, eat this bitch, and like grabs onto her and starts gnawing away at her and setting her on fire and all this stuff. And then all the other ghosts are like, oh, let's get that motherfucker, and so she gets like overwhelmed with ghosts and dragged down to the basement to be killed. And then so then at that point, Harry's like tapped the fuck out again. So he like collapses. Susan grabs him, and then Justine and Bob and Susan and Harry are able to get the fuck out of the house as it burns itself into the hole, killing everybody, like all the Red Court vampires, and destroying the whole thing. And this takes us into like, not the epilogue, but like the final chapter, which with these Dresden Files, final chapters tend to be kind of like an epilogue. So Harry has to spend a while in the hospital, and because the burn ward, because he's all burnt up, right, because of the fire and everything, is full, he ends up in the same room as Charity for some reason, like a woman who's suffering from like he ends up in like the gynecology or the post pregnancy area for bedding, which is hilarious, right? So hilarity ensues. And she's still mad at him and whatnot, but it's all good because we find out that the baby has gotten better, that the baby's going to survive and be good, and that him and Susan have been in like contact with like she sends him letters and calls him, but she refuses to come talk to him. And so he finally tracks her down. She's like hanging out at a beach in the sun, and she mentions that being in the sun is the only thing that helps her like keep the keep the thirst down so she doesn't do anything, but at night she has to like lock herself up because she kind of loses it a little bit. At that point he proposes and she's like, I can't resist you. And not in like a sexual way, you pervs. She can't resist drinking that delicious Dresden blood. And so then she leaves, and then they don't really have any contact after that. So sad times. Harry finally found someone who loved and who loves him back, and he fucked it up, or it got fucked up. We find out that Lydia's okay, that the Catholic Church has some sort of protection program against supernatural creatures, and so took her in, like Father, what's his name, that helped out before, like got her shunted away over there. And then we learned that Thomas and Michael, after the spirits left, that Thomas is like, oh no, I know a way to get out of here, but he's not strong in like powers of the Never, and so it took him to like a strip club that he owns. And Michael was like, the fuck is this? And so they were fine and they were good. And then time goes by and Dresden's like super depressed because of Susan. And so Michael comes to visit him. And at some point, Thomas sends Justine to go like bang him out to like give him some encouragement. And he's like, you can leave. That's not what I want. Murphy comes to visit him as well, and they actually meet up there's a funeral service for Kravos, and they both go to it and talk, and she's still pretty fucked up from like the emotional damage that was done to her, but she's doing all right. One day, a bit later, Bob is like, hey man, you get the fuck up and like, you know, keep living with your life. Plus the White Council sent you a message. And Dresden's like, what do they want? And he's like, they're coming. And he's like, coming for what? It's like the war with the vampires you started. He's like, Jesus. And apparently there was a big attack in like Berlin or Paris or somewhere in Europe or whatever. And so now wizards are afraid, or they're refusing to go out at night because that's when the vampires are the strongest and get out. And there's been like some back and forth with that whole thing. And so the council's coming here to Chicago to like have a council meeting, a big meeting, and to deal with it and to figure out what the next steps are. And you're definitely gonna have to be there, Harry. It's like the one wizard in the White Council that's here. And then finally the book wraps up. He finally gets a letter from Susan, and all it says is, I love you, which wraps up Grave Peril. This book was fucking excellent. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, this might be the most badass book. I still want to go with, I kind of like the first one. This one had some repeating things which were kind of funny. Like at some point, like Dresden losing his powers because he's all tuckered out and then getting them back because of like crazy nonsense is like, oh, it's kind of silly, but it was still badass. And the summon thing at the end was awesome. And the book flowed well. Michael's an excellent character, and I like that it really got into the depth of like Harry's character and development and growth when it comes to like the love and then like the tragedy of like things going on with Susan and stuff. And she's a great character as well. So all in all, this is an excellent book. I'd probably say I like the first one better still. And the second one is the weakest, even though it's still good. So there you go. Eventually I'll get to more of these books. But I can't say when that will be. Anyway, so go ahead, like, share, subscribe, comment, and I will catch you guys later. Bye.